Hello, this is John Harbour from Exclusive Scottish Visits, working in conjunction with American Scottish Foundation, and welcome to the third and final part of the tour of the Island of Skye. In the last part we started at Portree, the capital of the island. We went up to the Trotternish Ridge, we saw the Old Manor Store, Kilt Rock, Museum of Island Life. We talked about Flora MacDonald, the saviour of Bonnie Prince Charlie. In this final episode we're going to the Waternish Ridge. We're going to see Skye Skins, we're going to see Trumpin Church where a massacre took place. I'll talk about the MacLeod clan of Dunvegan Castle, and I'll also talk about fairies, living beings that are still recognised today. So I'd now like to just sit back, enjoy this third and final part of a tour of the Island of Skye. Hello, this is John Harbour of Exclusive Scottish Visits, and welcome to my tour of the Island of Skye. Well, first let's orientate ourselves. This is a map of Scotland, and up the far northwest you can see the Island of Skye. Homing in to the Isle of Skye, there's Loch Snizort Free Church, where we're going to start. This is the Snizort Bridge United Free Church of Scotland. Relatively plain, but perfectly positioned to take advantage of the lovely view down Loch Snizort. It was built in around 1847 under the supervision of the very Reverend Roderick MacLeod. He also oversaw the church build at Uig. He was involved in an incident that almost rocked the Church of Scotland to its core, which led to the disruption. Reverend Roderick MacLeod was born on Skye in 1794. He was educated at Aberdeen University. He took his divinity degree there, and then he came back to Skye and worked with his father in about 1818, because his father had a parish. He himself was a Church of Scotland minister, and he had a parish up at Lydale. We'll be passing through that on the way to the west. Roderick MacLeod got involved in the building of this church, a beautiful little church at Snizort, but in 1843 he broke away from the established Church of Scotland to join the Free Church of Scotland, and at one stage actually became its head, or as it's called, the moderator. I'm often asked why there are so many churches in Scotland, and one of the reasons is because of this disruption or schism in the church. And this was a bitter nationwide division that split the established Church of Scotland. In effect, there was a backlash against the patronage system, whereby rich landowners selected local ministers. And in 1843, about 1/3 of the Church of Scotland ministers walked out and formed the new Free Church, which in their eyes removed the state's encroachment on the spiritual independence of the church. Of course, they needed new premises, so a large number of churches were built for this new order called the Free Church of Scotland. Well, we continue heading north, and Loch Garishornish comes into view, which is a sea loch leading from Loch Snizort, and we're now passing through typical settlements or hamlets that are scattered all over Skye. And it's always interesting to note the names of these settlements to discover whether they have Norse, which is a Viking settler, or Gaelic origin. For example, the first couple of settlements we arrive at are Suladale and Trelane, which means Battle of Enclosure, and they both originate from the Norse language. But as we continue on, we come to the settlements of Flashadder, Flat Pasture or Shieling, and Edinbane, the White Face or Slope, and both originate from the Gaelic language. And this happens all over the island. Although the Norse lost these islands in the late 13th century, the influence of that culture continues to linger on. We continue west in the landscapes of fairly flat heather-strewn heath, with horned, black-faced sheep grazing everywhere. But about 3 miles before the settlement of Dunvegan, there's a road to the right, which we take to gain access to the heart of the Waternish Peninsula. And you can see here on this map where we are, top left of Skye, the Waternish Peninsula. Then, a few hundred yards later on the left-hand side is a lay-by, which is a pull-in by the side of the main road. And there's an old stone-built bridge, which is known locally as the Fairy Bridge, and has a connection with the fairy flag that hangs at Dunvegan Castle. Let me tell you a little bit about the legend of the fairy flag. Legend has it that a chief of Clan MacLeod actually married a fairy, but she could only stay with him for 20 years in the mortal state. And at the end of that time, she came here onto this bridge with the clan chief and said to him, "I must depart now for fairyland." But before she departed, she gave him a flag, a magical fairy flag. And this became a symbol for the clan for many years thereafter. And she said, if ever you're in difficulty, although you can't call on me personally, all you need to do is to wave that flag and you'll have a horde of MacLeods at your back to fight your battles for you. Well, there is most certainly a flag that can be seen at Dunvegan Castle, the stronghold of the MacLeod clan, but how it came into the MacLeod's hands is not known exactly, and it's pretty fanciful that it's a fairy flag. However, it's worth noting that the incredible landscape of Skye, which includes grassy knolls, ruined castles, mysterious pools, rock formations, it makes an ideal location for fairy folklore. And some of the locations look like the sort of place that fairies would gather, and many local legends do bring it to life. Well, back on the road, we head further north up the Waternish Peninsula to hear of tales of an area with a very sad and bloody history. But before then, we pass by the settlements of Luster and Stein, and it's time we turn right and find an amazing tannery of all things, and stop for a cup of coffee in their delightful outdoor cafe that looks out onto the waters of the Minch and the Outer Hebrides beyond. Skye Skins, as it's called, was established in 1983 and is the sole remaining commercial woolskin tannery in Scotland. It was created by the Hartwell family and produces superb quality handcrafted sheepskin leather and woolen goods. Definitely a place to stop for a visit and look into their small factory at the back. And if you've never visited one, it's also a great place for a cup of tea in a yurt with sheepskin-backed chairs. I have to say, the home-baked cakes and shortbread are to die for. When we get back on the road, we head up to the top of the Waternish Peninsula. We're going to see the ruins of Trumpin Church and to hear the story of a terrible massacre. The road leading up to Trumpin Church has some fabulous views over to the Outer Hebrides on our left-hand side, and on the right is a small rising hill, the side of which is covered in blooming purple heather, an extraordinary sight. We continue along the road, and at Lower Halistra there's a fork in the road. We take the left fork to continue following with the sea on our left-hand side. We pass some lovely original Skye cottages of the late 18th century with the thatched roofs, very prevalent in the past. But as we get to the top of the rise, the ruins of Trumpin Church come into view. Knowing the story of what happened here always makes me shudder slightly, so let me tell you that story of clan rivalry between the MacLeods and MacDonalds, one of their bloody battles and savagery which still reverberates down the centuries today. Before I describe the terrible events which led to the ruin of Trumpin Church, I need to tell you of an appalling massacre a year earlier when some MacLeod men were visiting the island of Eigg, a MacDonald stronghold in those days, and if you are looking for Eigg on a map, it's approximately 10 miles south of Skye's Slate Peninsula. Well, the story of Eigg was that some of the visiting MacLeods became too amorous with local MacDonald women, were taken aside, bound and set adrift in a boat from the island. And to reap revenge, the MacLeods arrived in force in the spring of 1577 and sought out the islanders. Well, having seen the MacLeods approaching, the islanders hid in a cave known as the Cave of St. Francis, which is down a steep bank and onto the shore. There's a small waterfall and foliage covering the entrance, so it's not easy to find. However, the MacLeods did find the MacDonald islanders in the cave, set fire to thatch and brushwood just outside, and every man, woman and child suffocated. It was not until the 19th century that all the bones were gathered from the cave and given an appropriate burial. So I tell you this to put into perspective the events of the following year. So let me tell you about it, actually from on-site Trumpin Church. I'm just at Trumpin Church, sitting at the top of the Waternish Peninsula. And as I come up here, I'm actually looking right out across to the Outer Hebrides, and I can see the Uists from here, North Uist. And down in front of me is the bay where the MacDonalds came from the Uists to get revenge on the MacLeods for the massacre of Eigg. And when they arrived, they beached their boats down in the bay, and they came up here. It was a Sunday. They knew that the MacDonalds would actually be inside the church having their Sunday service, and when they were inside and the doors were closed, they came up over the wall, barred the doors, barred the windows, then set fire to the church. It's about 150 people that were in there. The screams were drowned out by a MacDonald piper, apparently, who was walking around the church. They all died except for one young girl who was able to escape, and she went down to Dunvegan to raise the alarm. Now, the MacDonalds thought that they'd escaped and they went down back onto the beach. However, the MacLeods headed this way fairly fast, and they found that their boats were actually beached on the gravel. They couldn't actually get them off. The MacLeods descended upon the MacDonalds in force, and effectively every single one was slaughtered. Instead of building or digging graves, they brought them up to a dike, and a dike is a dry stone wall, a dry stone dike, and basically laid them along the dike and then just kicked the dike over on top of the men. And actually the battle was called the Battle of the Spoiling Dyke. Trumpin Church, a very eerie place. I don't think I'd come here at night actually. You can see down below the church, we're looking down across a bay, and it's not a sandy beach, it's a gravel beach, but this is the bay that the MacDonalds came into. And it's tidal, so of course once they got the boats basically up in the sand, at that stage it was more difficult to get them off because the tide had gone out. And over to the right, the Ewists. This is North Uist, and that's the island from where the MacDonalds came to seek revenge after the massacre of the island of Egg. I have to say, Trumpin Church is so eerie, and one can only wonder at what those poor souls trapped inside must have gone through. Well, we leave Trumpin Church now and make our way down the Waternish Peninsula once more, and at the ferry bridge we eventually come to a junction and turn right towards the small village of Dunvegan and the magnificent Dunvegan Castle. Before we get to Dunvegan, about half a mile from the village, is the ruin of St Mary's Old Church, dating from about 1694. It's a rectangular shape, roughly built of stones or boulders, and is reminiscent of other post-Reformation churches in Skye. It's surrounded by a dry stone dike or a dry stone wall, which is without cement. And here's a quick view of inside the church itself. This church has been the resting place of MacLeod chiefs since 1835. And I'm actually kneeling down at John MacLeod, MacLeod and MacLeod, who was the last one to be laid to rest in February 2007. Well, on leaving St Mary's, we're going to head down towards Dunvegan Castle. This magnificent structure, or series of structures, as there have been so many additions since the first tower was built. And that tower was built in the 13th century. Amazing to think that this stronghold has been in the family of the clan chiefs of MacLeod for nearly 800 years. The MacLeods are from warring Viking stock, possibly one of the reasons that they had the determination to hold onto this stronghold throughout history. Indeed, their motto is "Hold Fast," with a bull motive in the centre of their clan shield. And when you look at the castle itself, it's holding fast onto a huge rock, 175 feet high, which used to be surrounded by the sea. And if we take a very quick look inside, the MacLeod fairy flag is hanging in a frame on one of the seaward-facing walls. It's made of silk, yellowish-brown, is about 20 inches square or 48 square centimetres. It is believed to originate from the Far East, and it may even be connected to the Crusades, and perhaps could have been a banner taken from a vanquished foe. Well, before we leave the castle, we should actually visit the beautiful gardens around the castle. There's 5 acres of formal garden, which began in the 18th century, containing a water garden, rose garden, walled and woodland walks with a mix of flowers, exotic plants and specimen trees. Well, we'll leave the castle and head down into the village and quickly come upon a very strange sign saying Giant Angus MacAskill Museum. On the left there's a quaint straw-thatched cottage, and this museum is dedicated to Angus MacAskill, one of the tallest men ever at 7 feet 9 inches or 2.36 metres. His life was quite extraordinary, and it's known that he met Queen Victoria for his size and feats of strength. He also performed in a circus with Uncle Tom Thumb, the smallest man in the world. This museum was established in 1989 by a local man to provide a lasting memorial to a notable member of the clan MacAskill. On leaving Dunvegan village, we want to head south once more. I'm going to take you to Glendale. We turn right. I'm going to show you a famous memorial that represents 5 crofters who sought and achieved land reform in the late 18th century. I'm standing just outside the small settlement of Glendale, and I'm actually standing at a monument which commemorates what they call the Glendale Martyrs, in fact the Glendale Land Leaguers, because in the 1880s they were complaining about the fact that their land had been reformed to such an extent that one family couldn't subsist on the land, and also they'd taken away the right for
grazing on the land, common grazing as it's called. And because of that, they decided to bring their own livestock onto the land, and the police were called to try and remove them. The police were dealt with rather sharply by the locals, and they called upon the government to help. And the government actually sent 4 gunboats. There were 3 marine detachments and 1 infantry detachment. And on the day that they arrived and landed here, 600 men from Glendale gathered just across the road in a small amphitheatre, and they held a service. And they were actually still saying their prayers as the Marines and 50 armed police came up the hill. As they approached, they started shouting, but the men dispersed with dignity. 5 of the men who led it, led by John Macpherson, were imprisoned for a few months, but I'm pleased to say that the authorities saw sense, and eventually, after a few years, and not just land reform, but the way that the crofting laws were written, that common grazing was returned to the people of Glendale. But it took many years for that to happen, and it says here that the Glendale land leaguers achieved what they needed to achieve. So this commemorates the achievements of the Glendale land leaguers, 1882 to 1886. A great achievement.
And as we continue west, we're going to go and visit Neast Point. This road, a very narrow single-track road, leads down to Neast Point Lighthouse. And on a good day, it's a super place to visit and walk along the cliffs and down to the lighthouse. I have to say, on a sunny day, it was absolutely lovely just to walk around the cliff edges and to film there. So here's me at Neast Point telling you all about it.
I'm standing in the far west of Skye on a place called Neast Point. And you can see at the very end of Neast Point is a lighthouse. And in fact, Neast Point Lighthouse, the walkway down, is quite famous. Lighthouse was built by David Allen Stevenson in 1909. It was opened then. It's still operating and saves ships from these waters from danger. It has actually been operated by the Northern Lighthouse Board in Edinburgh since about 1990, so it's not manned. Just across to the left of me, there is a cable system. It was so dangerous during the winter, especially for people to go down there, that they had a cable system taking supplies directly from the upper cliff all the way down to the lighthouse and the cottages. You can see the cottages are down there as well. Lighthouse is about 100 feet high, thereabouts. It can be seen for 14 miles. Very important for navigators of ships, of course, to be able to see the lighthouse. And the thing about David Allen Stevenson, he came from this Stevenson family. And of course, Robert Stevenson, his grandfather, would have established the business, the Stevenson Lighthouse business. And of course, one famous Stevenson that we all know about is Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote books like Kidnapped, Treasure Island, and the sort as well. And the reason that he wrote those sorts of books attached to the water is because his grandfather and father used to bring him here in a boat when they were doing maintenance on the lighthouses. So he'd have seen all this, he'd have been aware of everything that was going on, but he didn't want to become a lighthouse keeper himself. He wanted to become a writer, and what a writer he was. So there you go, Neast Point Lighthouse. What a cracking place.
We continue south and just past Roskill, keeping the sea to our right-hand side, we can see in the distance some rather strange flat-top mountains, as spectacular as any of tabletop mountains of South Africa, albeit a wee bit smaller. These are known as MacLeod's Tables and formed a result of land slippage. There's some lovely stories associated with the mountain, and here's one that I just love to recount.
Behind me there are a set of mountains, and you can see one of them is flat-topped. That's actually called MacLeod's Table. And there's a story that the MacLeod clan chief was invited to Edinburgh to James V's court. And when he was there was candelabras, there was silver, there was great finery. And one of the courtiers had said to the clan chief, "This is Edinburgh for you, I hope you enjoy it." He says, "Well, we've got far better on the Isle of Skye, why don't you come and visit?" And he did. Well, the chief invited this gentleman to Skye, and the courtier discovered that dinner that evening was actually on MacLeod's Table, on top of the mountain. Tables full of food and drink with silver candelabras on the table, and also there were scores of clansmen surrounding the proceedings, holding torches, and above them all was a beautifully starry sky night with the moonlight shining down. The MacLeod clan chief had proved his point, and the courtier agreed that things were indeed much better on Skye.
Well, as we head south, we pop into the Talisker distillery, which was founded in 1830 by Hugh and Kenneth McCaskill. It's certainly a whisky that I enjoy, and in fact won the best single malt in the world in 2015. Talisker was also drunk by Robert Louis Stevenson. And of course, James Bond himself was seen drinking it in the film Die Another Day. And if it's good enough for James, it's good enough for me. Continuing south, we come to what is known as the Fairy Pools. What we find are beautifully clear crystal blue pools on the River Brittle. Many tributaries run down from the Coolin Mountains into the glen, forming waterfalls that make up the pools, and wild swimmers have been known to swim in the icy waters, but it's not really advisable without a wetsuit. They're really lovely, and it's easy to find a solitary spot to sit and contemplate the issues of the day with the sound of the waterfalls trickling nearby, allowing the stress to quietly subside and allowing mind and body to totally relax, surrounded, of course, by fairies. Well, with fairy dust in our hair, we now make our way all the way to the south of Skye, to the small village of Kyleakin, and that's derived from the word Kyle, which is a strait of water, and Hacken, which comes from King Hacken, so waterway of King Hacken. And I'm about to tell you a lovely story of a castle that sits right at Kyleakin.
We are now in Kyleakin, and it's just quite close to the Skye Bridge. And behind me is a ruined castle. It's a 15th century fortress as such. As you can see, there's not much of it left now, but there's a legend has it that it was a much older fortress on this site, and it was actually built for a Norwegian princess whose name locally was Saucy Mary. And the reason for that was because she used to stretch a chain from the castle walls over to the other side of the Kyle to stop ships passing without paying a toll. Now, when the ships had paid the toll, she'd remove the chain, and as they were passing, she'd stand on the battlements of the castle and she would show her breasts, flash her breasts, and for that reason she became known as Saucy Mary. You may remember that I mentioned Saucy Mary, and she's believed to be buried on top of a mountain called Ben na Caoillich, and that's Mountain of the Old Woman in Gaelic. And it's just outside Broadford. She asked for this to ensure that she may forever face the land of her birth in Norway, and the winds that blow from Norway would touch the place where she lay. Well, thank you, John, from Kyleakin on the Isle of Skye. Virtual John, that is. Raining here today, just as I say farewell, but thank you for listening to the 3 parts of my 3-part series on a tour of the Isle of Skye. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'd now like to raise a glass to you, wherever you are in the world. Slán